Hello everybody, just before we start the podcast, a quick note from me and the entire Craftcast team. We just want to wish you and your family a really fantastic Christmas and an even happier New Year. We have lots and lots and lots of exciting content to share with you throughout 2023 and beyond. We've got some great guests lined up, really exciting times to come. But before that, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. And as I say, once again, have a fantastic Christmas and a brilliant New Year. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Craftcast, the Freemasons Podcast. Now today we are going to be looking at Masonic terminology, and we will be, explaining some common terminology that you may have already heard in the existing episodes of the podcast. And if you're sat there scratching your head thinking, what on earth does that mean? Well, hopefully this podcast will help you out. As usual, I'm joined by James Dalton.
Hello.
And Stephen Watley.
Hi guys.
Gents, how you been?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you, actually. Was suffering with a bit of a cold last time we got together.
You were, yes.
But sort of recovered from that now.
Are you still contagious?
I'd like to think not. It's been a little while, so I'd like to think I'm healthy.
Paint a cross on the door and just leave us here to...
No, I'm not going to give you the plague, don't worry.
Okay, that's a relief.
Well, I was sat next to and I'm still here and alive, so I feel like that's probably a good sign.
For now. Wait for the next episode.
Thanks,
Sorry, that was sinister, wasn't it?
That's a good dark turn.
That wasn't a threat, just saying. You know, James, if he breathes on you, then it could be all over.
You know, if something happens to me, you know the first person that the police are going to turn to.
How's student life, Stephen? How is life on campus?
Yeah, student life is good. I feel like we should sort of have a recurring... It's turning into a recurring theme that we have a short, brief student update.
I think it is, and I think it's probably reflected in the fact that I long for the days where the thing I most had to worry about was a 3,000-word essay. I miss those days.
It's funny how the grass is always greener, right? At university, you're like, I want to get out there, be working, be responsible for myself, be able to manage my own money and all that. And Jamie's like, absolutely not. Yeah. A friend of mine just graduated and she's doing the degree that I'm doing. And I was thinking, she got a job working in a hospital, doing some lab work that looks really interesting. And then she called me the other day and she's like, I really miss university. I miss being able to not live in the real world.
And get up at 11 o'clock every morning.
I mean, that's optimistic, but sure.
Gents, today, this explainer episode, why, James, do we think that this will be useful for our listeners?
Well, we're very conscious that we want non-Masons to listen to the podcast, and there's going to be a lot of new or recently initiated Masons, we hope, listening as well.
Yes.
And in previous episodes, we have slipped into using specific Masonic terms, and there's a high probability that a lot of the people listening have no idea what on earth it is that we're talking about. So if that's you, this episode is for you.
Fantastic. Stephen, what do you hope to achieve by the end of this episode?
Just a little bit more of an awareness as to some of the terms, like we say, that we use, and sort of debunk the mysteries behind exactly how we speak and some of the language that we use. Well,
Stephen, why don't you start us off? So one of the terms that I'm sure we've used, if we were to listen back, our legions of fans, I'm sure will be able to confirm or deny this. The term Worshipful Master. What is a Worshipful Master?
So, obviously, as you guys know, Worshipful Master being the head of a lodge. I think when you first, in my experience, especially within university, you say that term, people are like, whoa, that sounds a bit odd. And I guess it does in normal everyday language, so I think it's quite a good first topic of discussion.
Yeah.
I think the word, specifically the key word there that people don't generally like is worshipful. And I think from my understanding of that is that, and I think it also comes up for the Masons among our listeners, will probably remember from the address to the brethren after an installation, a bunch of other terms that we'll probably have to... Words there, as much as we're all equal, at some point someone has to sort of look after the lodge and take charge in that sense. And so calling them the Worshipful Master is not necessarily about it's most certainly not worshipping anyone or anything.
No.
It's more about respect for that person who is doing that job for your lodge.
Yes.
A term that we will also discuss, and also, I mean, it also has sort of historic roots in Freemasonry anyway, which is sort of where a lot of the language comes from, I think. But now it has that more respectful tone from my point of that's the way I see it, at least.
And for our non-Masonic listeners, how would one become the Worshipful Master or the head of their lodge?
Well, I guess in the same way that you'd become sort of in charge of anything, really, in terms of you go through the ranks of an experience the different jobs within your lodge, the different sort of responsibilities, help out within the lodge and take on that sort of more senior role.
Yeah.
As you go through over the years and you gain that experience, at some point your lodge essentially goes, well, we feel like you're ready to take on that more senior, responsible role of looking after our lodge, and we trust you. And I think it's a really nice a thing that when a lodge trusts that person with their lodge, because the way that our sort of ceremonial stuff works is that can't change pretty much for a year unless something drastic happens. So that really is placing a lot of trust in that person. So I guess in answer to your question, you try and enjoy your experience in the lodge, take on responsibility as and when you, as our program master said in our second episode, don't take on too much, take on what you can when you can, so that you still enjoy it. And then at some point, hopefully, you'll feel ready to take on that more senior role.
So it's sort of a progressive thing, isn't it? In that you start off usually as sort of what's called the steward.
Yeah.
Which that's probably the lowest sort of office within a lodge, isn't it?
Yeah.
The first, not the lowest. That's the wrong term. The first office that one would usually have in the lodge when you first decide that you want to perhaps get more involved, and then there's a sort of route, isn't there, that's sort of set out for you.
It's sort of weirdly counterproductive, I find, that the steward's role, because actually, not the role itself, but the idea that it's the lowest, because like you said, it's not, and actually a lodge struggles to run without its stewards,
Very
and yet
true.
it's
Very true.
and yet it's it's an extremely important role.
Yeah.
And yet it's the first one that you get given.
I've done my time as a steward, as I'm sure we all have.
We've all done our time as a steward, but it's a really important role, steward, because it gets you out to know the members of the lodge.
That's a
You've
great
probably
point,
not been in the lodge for very long, typically, and so you get to know everybody's name, you get to know what they're about, what their interests are, what type of wine they like to drink. All very important characteristics.
That's probably the main one, isn't it?
And
then Stephen, obviously, as you say, you advance through a number of senior positions, sort of climbing that ladder within the lodge until you get to the point.
You're ready, essentially.
You get to the point. And what I hear is I'm yet to go through the chair, as it's called. I'm yet to become a Worshipful Master or a head of my group of Freemasons. But I hear that actually doing the other roles, and actually, James, I think you're the only one of the three of us that has been through that position. I hear that doing the other roles is really important to enhance your understanding of the top job.
one of the really smart things about Freemasonry, and whoever set this system up hundreds of years ago, these were really intelligent people, is every role prepares you for the next role. So once you've been a steward, typically you'd go on to be what's called the inner guard, the person that sits inside the door of the lodge. You learn from being in a guard what the person next to you, called the junior deacon, what their role looks like. That is the role that you do next. And it is called progression because you progress through these several offices, but the backwards and forwards and the shadowing you do in those roles prepares you for the next thing. So by the time you get to be Worshipful Master, you've been through all those jobs, you've done all those elements of the ritual, and you've also kind of grown and learned from those that have gone ahead of you. You kind of grow up together almost.
And I think that you use the term progression, which is the right term in this sense, but also to point out, I think it's important, it's not like a career progression. It's not in that sense. It's progression of your experience and your own Masonic journey and your own learning. And like you say, you know, from junior to senior deacon, you work very closely together. And I always think it's quite nice when you see, because it's not just the role, but actually people that are working in those roles. When you see people like a junior and senior deacon that go from that, and then they go to to junior warden and senior warden at some point. At some point, there'll be immediate past master and master.
Yep.
And they sort of go through that journey together. And I think, I mean, I certainly have a sort of a close bond with the guy in my mother lodge who I've done that with. And I just think it's quite a nice extra sort of facet to your lodge. Yeah.
And the wardens that you talk about, again, for the non-Masonic listeners, the senior warden is sort of the second most senior office in the lodge.
Yeah.
The junior warden is the third most senior office. And so we talked about steward earlier. You'll progress from being a steward, inner guard, junior deacon, junior warden, senior warden, and then worshipful master. That's a typical journey.
Yes.
Some other offices, sort of like assistant secretary or charity steward. Some lodges will kind of put those in at various points in that process, but that's the standard kind of journey that most will go on.
And it's also important to say, just when you've done those, it doesn't mean that you then drop off the edge. You then can become what's called an immediate past master. And that's someone who's just done the job of Worshipful Master. Someone else has taken over now. But their job is very much to literally sit next to them and, I guess, help them along, reassure them. They have
a guide, essentially.
A guide, someone who's literally just been through the same experience, to sort of help them along. And there's a sort of ceremonial element to it as well. But that's really interesting. So thank you for that, Stephen. Mr. Dalton.
Yes.
Can you, because I think we used it in our
That was a
explainer.
scared yes.
It wasn't it? Yeah.
What on earth is this?
Go on.
Are you ready?
I think so.
Degree.
That is a very big one to answer. So I guess the easiest way to think about when we say degree is a level or a point in your journey. Now, we've just spent some time talking about what we call the lodge officers, which are the administrative functions in the lodge. Mm-hmm. Degrees are levels of almost coming into Masonry. They're ceremonies that you go through pretty much immediately and in the preceding year or so after you join. So when we talk about being initiated, that means you have gone through the first degree ceremony. So you become what's called an entered apprentice. Mm-hmm. And then after some period of time, maybe a year, maybe less, you become a second degree Freemason, known as a fellowcraft.
And there's another ceremony for that, isn't there? There
is another ceremony, that you go through. And then the third ceremony you would go through is the third degree, also known as the Master Mason degree. And that gets you to be what's called kind of a fully fledged Master Mason. It almost,
Mason.
Yeah, it completes the process of joining Freemasonry.
Yes.
And each of those degrees, each of those ceremonies that you go through has a different life lesson that you're taught. So in the first degree, it's all about birth and coming into the world and realizing that, some people are more privileged than others, and it's the responsibility of the more privileged to help the less privileged.
In the beginning, as they say.
In the beginning, yeah. In the second degree ceremony, it's more about the advantage of education, making the most of education, learning as much as you can through life.
Essentially the middle stage of your life where you're really sort of living the life, as they say, trying to take full advantage of the experiences on offer.
And then in the third degree ceremony, it's all about getting you to understand that at some point, sadly, we are all going to die.
Coming to terms with your own mortality.
Yeah, coming to terms with your own mortality. And everyone's grave is the same size. As my parents would say, you can't take it with you. So it's about you trying to look within yourself and go, what impact can I leave during my time here? How can I be a good and virtuous person so that when I am gone, what's my legacy? And as Stephen says, it's very much an analogy of life, kind of the birth, the life part, and then preparing for those final years of your life. So that's what the degrees are.
Brilliant.
Which I think ties into what the term that we've used on various occasions throughout the podcast so far, that Masonic journey. There's lots of different sort of Masonic journeys you go on in terms of, like you said before, you become for want of a better phrase, fully fledged Freemason. When you become a Master Mason, you've gone. That is a journey in itself, doing those 3 degrees. But it doesn't just stop there. And I think that's one of the nice things about Freemasonry is there is always somewhere else to go with that journey. You've got those first 3 ceremonies, but then you're on the lodge ladder for the officers, and then you go through that journey. And then after that, you might want to join Royal Arch. and go on that journey and go through essentially the same thing, have a ceremony that teaches you something new, go through the offices of that chapter, etc. There are other side degrees that you can then join and do the same thing yet again.
It's important to differentiate between degrees and offices or ranks. We have different ranks, we have different offices and different levels of responsibility. But once you've been through that third degree, the Master Mason degree, we are all the same. So whether you are the Grand Master or a brand new Master Mason that's just gone through that ceremony, we are all third degree Masons. We are all equal in the eyes of Freemasonry.
Yes.
Well, I think to go even further than that, every Mason is an entered apprentice.
Indeed.
Every Mason has white on their apron. Yeah.
The Program Master, the Grand Master, they are entered apprentices first and foremost. You reminded of that a lot in the ritual, even at the point where, because as part of our sort of keeping that journey almost sacred, for want of a better, for what it means to us and what it means to the individual, you ask people to leave if they haven't seen that part of the ceremony yet. And when you say that, you don't say, can all entered apprentices leave? You say, can all those below the degree of a fellow craft leave? Because we are all entered apprentices.
I'm learning.
An important distinction, I think.
Absolutely.
If I'm allowed to say that.
No, I think that's true. I think that's definitely true.
We all looked at each other then like...
Did I just say something I wasn't allowed to say?
Stephen, what on earth is a festive board? Is it anything to do with Christmas?
I mean, we do have festive boards at Christmas, but
we do,
no,
but I'm talking about the festive. No, okay, good.
I mean, I think it's actually a really important part of Freemasonry.
Absolutely.
That it's not like in the ceremonies or anything, but we do often say that every meeting has two parts to it. One part is the meeting in the lodge temple in the room, normally upstairs from where we are sat now, but also the second part, which is the Festive Board, which is essentially a dinner where we eat and drink with our fellow Masons and other people, sometimes as well, guests that aren't Masons, when we have a white table event or whatever. And I think it's a really important, at least equally important part of Freemasonry as the actual ritual and all the ceremonial stuff and the degrees like we were just talking about. That we get to spend time talking not necessarily about Freemasonry and getting to know each other on a different level, whilst also respecting those same values that we have.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned previously that example where we had in a lodge I visited the leader of one political party and the leader of another, both in the same lodge, and they'd go to the Festive Board and they'd have a chat about all things in life and have no issues politically, because they don't talk about that. They just respect each other's values as Masons and enjoy each other's company. And I think that side of Freemasonry is one of the most enjoyable sides for a lot of people, that social side.
I agree. And I think we've spoken about this before, but I remember as the anecdote I told before, where it was at the Festive Board where I met that chap and I thought to myself, I'm not going to have anything in common with this person.
Yeah.
And it was there that I had the opportunity to get to know him and speak to him. And as I said before, he'd been to places I'd never heard of and fought in wars that I'd never heard of. And it was amazing. And I remember coming away from that meeting thinking, number one, which I should have known anyway, you should never judge a book by its cover. And number two, wow, that was a real eye-opener for me, because, that's for me what Freemasonry is all about. I over the course of that meal, got to know someone that I wouldn't, if I saw him in the street, we would just walk past each other, and I would not assume that was someone I could have a drink with down the pub.
We talk a lot about some of the benefits of Freemasonry being that it's intergenerational and that it's social, and it's something to sort of almost get away from the real world for a little while and enjoy others' company, other people that you otherwise probably wouldn't meet. And I think the Festive Board, that dinner that you'll have together, is probably where most of that is enjoyed. Without that, you wouldn't get to know that intergenerational aspect of your lodge and of Freemasonry if you didn't get a chance to sit down and have a meal with them.
It's slightly less formal than the ceremonial aspect of the meeting.
Yes.
That first part
a lot
of the meeting.
less formal, I'd say.
You get to have that sort of one-on-one conversation. meet other brethren, maybe somebody who you haven't sat next to in the actual lodge room because of their office or whatever it may be. But also, there are speeches that are given. You thank visitors from other lodges for coming to visit your lodge. If you have a candidate who's just been initiated, the person who proposed them will give a speech about that person and why they felt they would make a great Freemason. And they'll be given a chance to respond. And that's all part of that personal development stuff that we've spoken about before. The opportunity to build your confidence in public speaking. And we also sing the national anthem as well and give a toast to the king. So for those that like that slightly formal aspect of dining as well, I think the Festive Board's a great structure. And if you miss that maybe from days in the military or school or whatever it may be, it's always a good part of the meeting, I think.
No, I absolutely agree. And of course, you're forgetting the raffle.
Yes.
Do you love a good raffle?
Who doesn't love a raffle?
Does anybody else have a brother in their lodge who always seems to win the raffle? We have a past master in my lodge who I would say that 5 out of 6 meetings, he always wins the raffle.
Is this something that needs some sort of internal investigation? Are we suggesting that he's fixing it to win the box of Quality Street?
Absolutely not. I don't think he's fixing it. I think that fate is in his favour.
What's the brother's name? Sorry, that's the shout out.
It's Worshipful Brother Peter Wright, who was actually my proposer into Freemasonry.
Oh, well, hello, Peter, if you're listening.
He even won it on the night we gave him his 50th year long service certificate to celebrate 50 years. And it was not a fix. He genuinely won it. It's like a blessing that he has.
The magic touch.
The magic touch.
I think at my initiation, people were a little bit sceptical because my father had just initiated me from the chair, and he mixed the numbers, pulled out got a guest to pull out the raffle number. The guest was my grandfather, who pulled out my number.
Fix.
That's a lot like a fix.
Then I pulled out my dad's number. Then he pulled out my granddad's number.
I think this definitely needs some sort of term investigation.
Honestly, you should be ashamed of yourself. What did you win? Did you win anything good?
I really should remember that. I think it was a bottle of champagne.
Very nice. Better raffle prize than I've ever
Bottle
won.
of Cava, something like that.
I've got loads of bottles of whiskey in my cupboard at home that I've won in raffles. I kind of need to. I'm not a really whiskey drinker. The raffle cupboard. So I think I need to redonate them.
Christmas presents.
Oh, absolutely.
For us.
Oh, okay, I'll bear that in mind.
Definitely.
Craftcast specifically.
Yes, absolutely. James, this is a word that we've used a lot already this episode. Lodge.
Yeah, lodge is a really interesting one. And this is probably more aimed at the non-Masons listening, this explainer.
Yes.
A lot of people think that a lodge is the building that we meet in. That's not. That's just the Masonic Hall or the Masonic Centre.
Yes.
The lodge...
I think a lot of new Masons get that
is
mixed
true,
up
actually,
as well,
yeah.
to be fair.
The lodge is the collection of Masons.
Yes.
So it's the group of Masons that meet. And in one Masonic Centre, you might have 3, 4, 5, a dozen different lodges that all meet in that Masonic Centre at different times during the month or throughout the year.
Yeah.
So the lodge is the collective group of you together, that group of officers, that group of brothers who meet on that set night. It isn't actually the building or the room itself. It's the group of you as a collective.
You've explained that better than I think I've ever heard it ever explained before. So congratulations.
Better than the definition.
Not to be confused with the lodge room, though. Because lodge room is the name of the room with the black and white carpet.
Yes.
Where we do the ceremonial.
Where lodges meet, where groups of Freemasons meet.
That's right. Lodges meet in a lodge room inside
like a school of fish.
Yes, indeed.
Sorry?
Like your school of fish, like when you say a group of, you know, I was saying like a school of fish.
Right, sorry, yeah, I'm with you. I heard
going
school
back to
of fish. I was sort of...
He's going back to the suggestion of dolphin for the podcast.
Yeah, this is it. Oh,
Pod of dolphins.
School...
But actually, in a way, that's the way to think about it. The lodge is that collective noun for that group.
Yeah, I was actually making a point. I wasn't just talking about fish for no reason.
Fish? What on earth has happened?
I was actually trying to make a half intelligent point there.
Stephen's like, we don't talk enough about fish on this podcast. Honestly, I'm going to change
from the Mediterranean.
That's it. Yeah. And of course, James, you can also be a member of more than one lodge, can't you?
You can, and typically the process is that once you've been through those 3 degrees we spoke about earlier, so you're a Master Mason, you get what's called a Grand Lodge certificate, which is almost like they refer to it as being a passport in Freemasonry. It enables you to go and join other craft lodges. So yes, you can join several lodges, maybe in your same town or in a different town, and it really allows you to broaden your Masonic horizons and meet other Freemasons. And,
Yes.
and the ritual can be slightly different from lodge to lodge.
Yes.
And it gives you some exposure to that.
Without giving away anything, because and when we say that we don't want to give away anything, it's because we don't want to ruin the experience for anyone who wants to join.
It's like knowing the ending to a book before reading it, kind of
yeah,
thing.
exactly that, Stephen. What would happen in a regular lodge meeting? Like in a standard lodge meeting, what would someone expect to happen in that?
It's really made up of two main parts. So the first part is the ceremonial aspect, which is where we put on our regalia, so the aprons and collars you may have seen pictures of Freemasons wearing, and we do the ceremonial, so the initiation or the raising or the passing, the ceremonies we spoke about when we refer to degrees. And then the second part is what Stephen was saying, which is the festive board, where we just sit in our suits, have the meal, have a good conversation. Now, in the actual first part, the ceremonial, it's really broken down into two main pieces. The first, like any organisation, we do the business elements, so the accounts, the minutes of the last meeting, reporting on, anything we want to donate money to charity for, announcing
any other business,
proposing new candidates. And then the second part of it, the bigger part of the meeting, is where we actually do those ceremonies of bringing somebody in and raising them or passing them, or we change the Worshipful Master. And we go through that. It's called installation. It's a once-a-year event in every lodge where typically the officers move up that ladder to the next lodge office.
Yeah, okay. And you touched there on regalia. For those of us that perhaps aren't, as I say, aren't Freemasons, regalia, there's a few different bits to it, isn't there? So the obvious one that I think comes to mind for a Freemason is an apron. And the reason that Freemasons wear aprons, James, is it not? It sort of has our links to the stonemasons. And the idea being...
jumping in, I think pretty much all of our regalia has links to that.
Yes, I think so. So, for example, if you imagine medieval stonemasons, were dealing with sharp tools, sort of heavy rocks. If you were dealing with that sort of thing, you would want to wear an apron to protect yourself, to protect your clothes.
Indeed.
Those sorts of things. Gloves as well, which you may have seen Freemasons. We wear gloves, again, to protect your hands. It was an important bit of kit in those days. So really for us, although, as we've already touched on, one's apron now denotes perhaps sort of seniority, the level of advancement that you've had within Freemasonry.
Level of experience you have, I guess.
Yeah, level of experience, but, you will have people who've been in for a long time that haven't got, a certain apron, but that's not necessarily a reflection on them. It may just be that they have chosen not to be as involved.
Well, by experience, I sort of meant more as in the job that you've done and the experience you have in that job more than sort of how long you've been in Freemasonry as a whole.
Yes.
Like I obviously don't have a lot of as much experience as someone who's been in, well, as you guys who've been in longer than myself.
Yeah.
But I guess I would have more experience in the comms role than James because I'm a comms officer, but James wears a DC's
I'm with you.
apron
That's
because
fair.
he has experience in that DC role.
And actually it's nice. I think it's one of the things I find appealing is that you have those direct connections with our heritage as an organisation.
Well, and the I quite like also the symbolism behind it. Of there is a reason why there is something on all of the regalia. There is always a reason that it's on there. So, for example, the gloves being white is to sort of denote our purity as Freemasons rather than stonemasons.
Yeah.
Now, so all these little things have, there's always more learning to be done with these things, which is quite a nice part of Freemasonry as well. The program master said himself, there's still stuff that he's learning. He's the most senior, alongside the Grand Master, that we have. So
something again that obviously we've discussed. We're not a political organisation. We're a non-political organisation. We're a non-religious organisation. That being said, there is a requirement, isn't there, that you have to believe in something greater than yourself.
I guess it's more a-religious and apolitical, as in, because I think
definitely non-political. I would say.
Yeah, well, because what I would say, I guess so.
Yeah. anything that's sort of seen as divisive within society, we don't really want to.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not a controversial statement to say that the two things which usually divide people the most are political disagreements or religious disagreements. And that's part of the reason why in Freemasonry we are non-political and non-religious.
Yes.
Mate, what I was getting at, I guess, which I sort of didn't really explain, is that when you might say non-religious, it sort of implies, you can't be religious. When it's when it's not really that, it's just it has nothing to do. Like that's why I said because it has nothing to do with Freemasonry. Really, it's irrelevant.
And yet, a belief in a supreme being is a requirement, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah.
And that's. I mean, for example, I think of my own lodge. That could be any number of different deities, gods, whatever it may be, as long as it's a belief in something greater yourself, apart from the obvious one, which is sort of Satanism, that sort of thing is not allowed.
Absolutely.
But a benevolent supreme being.
Yeah. A question that I sort of see a lot from within the university scheme is essentially why we need that. And my take on that, at least, is that it's more about not seeing yourself as the most important thing.
I think that's right, yeah.
Since sliced bread, you're not the be all and end all of this world, and so when you hear the word God or that supreme being in any of the ritual, I think what's important is that you're in your own head, if nothing else, you replace that with what your understanding of that is.
Yeah.
That you replace that with your understanding of I am not. This is whether that be the greater good or a particular God of a particular religion. You replace that with your understanding of it, and that in that way it can become a very personal experience.
I think it's about a belief in something greater than yourself, and it's up to you as the individual to determine what that looks like. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And in my experience, one of the really great things about Freemasonry, we've already spoken, haven't we, about how religion and politics tend to divide people, typically. In Freemasonry, I can have somebody from one faith on my right, from a completely different faith on my left, me of a different faith in the middle, and we're all equal, and we're all the same, and we all come together as equals. And I genuinely don't think there's a huge amount of organisations out there that can claim that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the term supreme being is purposefully ambiguous.
Yeah,
and it's purposely phrased in that way to be fully inclusive. So you could be a Christian or a Muslim or a Sikh or Hindu or Jewish, whatever it may be, and actually there isn't even a requirement for you to be a practicing member of any of those faiths. As long as you profess a belief in something... You don't even need to
be a member of any, practicing or
as
otherwise.
Long as you believe in something greater than yourself, that is enough. And I think that's an important point to clarify, because I know, Stephen, as you said, you have the experience, I think we've all had it. That's often a question that people ask, isn't it? Is that a requirement?
Yeah, and why, I guess.
And why?
Because the natural assumption when you do something like that, when you say something like that is, oh, well, it's got to be religious, it's got to be that you're sort of worshipping some higher power, and it's not at all like that.
So we've been through a few phrases in this explainer episode, but as we go through the series, I'm sure there are going to be more phrases and words that we use that our listeners are probably going to think, oh, what on earth are they referring to? So, Stephen, do you want to talk about our idea for an explainer page?
Well, I think maybe we could have some sort of glossary of podcasting terms that we put up maybe on UGLE website, something like that, so that maybe when people are listening, they can just see, have a page up that they can refer to, a glossary, as I said, to go and have a look and see what on earth we're talking about.
I think that'd be a really good idea. And for our listeners, what do you want us to explain? Get in touch with us. UGLE_Grand Lodge on Twitter, podcasts@ugle.org.uk. Let us know what terms and explanations you want us to include on that page.
Yeah, and do you think it's a good idea? Would you like to see a podcast explainer?
Sounds good to me, gents. Okay. And leave it with us.
We'll
see what we can do. Fingers crossed.
Hopefully everyone
agrees.
Get in touch.
Get in touch. Well, listen, everybody, we very much appreciate you being with us today. We hope that you found this useful, Masons and non-Masons alike, and we cannot wait to be with you again. So, everyone, until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for your time. See you guys.
Craftcast, the Freemasons Podcast. The podcast is hosted by Shaun Butler, Stephen Watley and James Dalton. The producer is Marta Zandri, and the podcast is edited by Trisonic.